All right, welcome to the Bay Vibes podcast. And today we have a very special guest, Rex. Welcome to the Bay Vibes.
Thank you, Nate. Such a pleasure.
Thank you very much. If we could start off with a little bit of a background about yourself,
Of course.
and we can go from there.
Okay, so origin story. That's always good. We are
Yes.
stories.
Absolutely.
So, but first, I always want to give homage to the land, the owners of the land. So we are here in Palo Alto, right? Land of the Ohlone people, I believe, the original.
Okay.
Now, I am an intruder in that I was from the Far East. I tell people I'm from back east, and they say, oh, New York, Boston. Originally, I was born in Hong Kong of immigrant parents from China. So, in a way, I'm the product of refugees escaping communism. But, of course, no thanks to Chairman Mao do I exist, but practical communists who let a few 100,000 people go. And I grew up in Hong Kong until about age 10, in the context of the communism is important because then came the cultural revolutions inside China. And so my parents who escaped once and met in Hong Kong thought we better get going before we get stuck. So then my real growing up years were in Singapore, the teenage years, the years of becoming more formed. And I think this is an important aspect of when we become growing out of adolescence or into adolescence. And then came the end of Vietnam War, so I'm all of this era. And I think my parents were concerned because it's not domino in theory, it was in practice. Vietnam fell, Cambodia fell, Laos fell, Thailand was shaky. So I did not enter the national service, but they instead shipped me to New Hampshire, where I finished high school. And then I went to college very conveniently next state in Massachusetts, in Boston, Cambridge. And then I came out west. By then my parents had said, oh, the children are not coming back. So they came to meet us and they emigrated to California, actually right here at Palo Alto.
How long was that ago?
Oh, 1977.
Wow.
Yes, almost 50 years. Yeah, so I finished my college when I was technically a California PA resident. And that made it very convenient for me when I decided to choose between arts, photography, or medicine. I went into applying for medical school. So I went to UCLA for medicine, UCLA for medical training, and then UC San Francisco for further subspecialty training. So my background is I'm a pulmonary lung specialist in intensive care. But then for many years I was back east in Baltimore, where I did academic work at Johns Hopkins dealing with primarily lung cancer. So, and then before COVID, I'd already left Hopkins and I was doing more medical technology. And of course, being from the Bay Area of sorts, there were a lot of Bay Area med tech. So I've been sort of in and out of industry a little bit. And then with COVID, I came back to doing much more clinical medicine because I'm a lung specialist. And I, can deal with ventilators and so on. They were having poor dermatologists, skin doctors run ventilators. That's not good. It's like asking me to do skin grafting, plastic surgery, not good. So anyway, I've been back in clinical medicine, but along the way, I think I'm evolving what I'm going to be doing, and we can get more into that. But that's my stretchy, longitudinal spaghetti life thus far. Yeah.
Very interesting. You mentioned the lung cancer situation. Basically, my wife recently discovered, we recently discovered that my wife's father, my father-in-law, was diagnosed with lung cancer.
Yes.
So that's very interesting. Is that a very common occurrence in among the cancers per se?
Not amongst the cancers, but we know that it's unfortunately for most, not all, lung cancer is a disease of lifestyle. Sometimes we think by choice, but tobacco, nicotine is such a addictive product.
He was not a smoker.
He was not smoker. Okay, so around a year, if we go back a century plus ago, 1900, there were relatively few cases of lung cancer. Now, cancers also take time to develop. So people may have been dying of pneumonias and other things. But by 1950s onwards, 60s, and even to today, lung cancer is the #1 cancer killer amongst Americans. Even though as the number of cancer in men, there's more prostate, there's more colon cancer, women, there's more breast, there's more colon, but it's been a very deadly cancer, late diagnosis and so on. But what you said is right. There are also people who are never smokers, and especially now we're seeing this amongst younger people and amongst women, never smokers who end up with lung cancer. So this is quite a tragedy. And we're studying the epidemiology quite a bit. Some places it could be due to other exposures. So men, mostly men who work in mines, exposure to radon, and who knows with the chemicals in our food, the microplastics, that all probably play a role. And then genetics. Nate, people ask me, Dr. Young, so how do I grow old and healthy? And I used to jokingly say, and it's still partly true, well, first thing is you have to pick your parents well. So genetics does play a role. But nature is only a part of it. Nurture is also very important, how we live our life, avoiding the bad exposures and so forth. So I'm very sorry your father-in-law has maybe lung cancer. But the good news is, and this is not a spin, relatively good news is there's been a lot of progress made in the diagnosis and so-called staging and treatment. So treatment used to be always lung cancer, early you do surgery. Not so early, you do radiation. Advanced, you give chemotherapy, but it didn't do too much. But over the decades, it's really made a lot of advances. And so now, that's what we call personalized approach to lung cancer treatment, much more effective.
Yeah, I've heard like they're not going with the chemo. They're gonna try to treat it with medicine. But what's interesting, looks like the tumor is affecting his spine in some way.
Yes.
And he was like complaining about his lower back.
Yes.
And recently, when he was on the walk, he just fell and he broke his what is that? Like a hip. He broke his hip. So that was interesting. Like,
wow.
How?
So it's what we call pathologic fracture. Fracture is never normal, But people fracture for different reasons, often because of trauma, of course, but often more so in the elderly. In the ladies and so on, it could be due to osteoporosis. So one of the things we do suggest for enhanced lifespan, quality lifespan prevention is to do a DEXA scan, measure bone density. But in your father-in-law's case, his fracture may be what we call pathologic fracture, that the cancer has unfortunately spread to the spine and to the hips. So that area not only hurts, but it's also weakened because it's abnormal structure. So, but the important thing is we tell people now honestly, and it's not simple spin, that no matter what stage, it's very treatable. How one respond, we don't know necessarily. Will he be cured? Maybe, maybe not. Most likely not if it's spread to the spine. But with treatment and the right quality treatment, people's quality of life can be preserved. It's about buying time. Death is inevitability, part of life. But how we live and die, of course, is very important. We should have agency in deciding and choosing with good advice.
In your experience with lung cancer in particular, what is the rate of successful treatment?
Yeah. So we can look at different stages. That's how people used to calibrate, right? How likely is your house going to survive an oncoming storm? Well, it depends on the power, the force of the storm. Will they also, are you close to the coast and will it be flooded? But very often we look at the infrastructure of the house. And for this, we also talk about so-called functional status. So we want to know, is it a cancer or not? And it turns out lung cancer is not all one monotonous type of cancer. But it's cancer that starts in the lung and not one that goes to the lung. And there are at least 30 different types of lung cancers. Some are very rare relatively in distribution and so forth, and some of them are not as aggressive. But the standard types of lung cancer, we call non-small cell or small cell, we then look at the staging. Now we say, what's the molecular pattern, the fingerprint, how aggressive? Has it gone to places like metastasis? But very often we forget to consider how well a patient may respond to treatment and how long he or she may survive and with what quality of life. It has to do with what we call the functional status. So someone who is a long-distance runner, lifting weights, doing everything, not losing weight, not losing energy, finding a cancer, incidentally or otherwise, they may do much better because they can tolerate aggressive therapy versus someone who has lost weight, is spending a lot of time in bed due to fatigue. So I never like to quote percentages. Is it 40% 5-year? Is it 95%? Because at any one time, the practical reality is you're not 85% alive, 15% dead, or 45% dead and 55% alive. You're 0 or 100. The important thing is to factor in what is for oneself and for family good quality of life. So we really try to make it much more of a personal decision-making, what we call shared decision-making. Because otherwise, some people given a diagnosis and statistic, oh, this is 90% treatable, survivable, 10% not, will be worried and lose weight and kick the cat and argue because of the 10%, whereas other people are much more accepting. So I don't think there's a single easy formula. Of course, we can go with statistics, but the statistics, we also have to look at how well you respond, and that'll quickly change the prognosis.
Okay. Do you know roughly how many patients
Yes.
have you treated?
Oh, myself.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard to say. I'm not a surgeon. I'm not a radiation oncologist. I'm not an oncologist giving chemotherapy. So my role was in early detection, screening, was in detection,
Oh, I see.
making bronchoscopy, and some advanced late stages I used to treat. When it's blocking the airway, I go in with lasers and I core out tumor and I put in a stent. But patients I've come across treating their lung complications. For instance, we live in the Bay Area here, the home of the original home of Grateful Dead, which most people know about. And Bobby Weir, who is one of the founding members, he just died January the 10th from lung cancer. But in his case, it is said, and I saw his last concert on August the 3rd at Golden Gate Park. After he was diagnosed in July, nobody quite knew, or it wasn't very obvious. So he was treated and he died from, it said, pulmonary complications. So how many people? I know that as a cause of death, smoking is the number one preventable cause. I know your father-in-law did not smoke, but about 500,000 people die in excess of what's expected from smoking complications. 1/3 are from lung cancer, about
In the US.
in the U.S. every year. 1/3, about 170,000 cancer deaths, lung cancer deaths. About 1/3 from emphysema, or so-called COPD. And then the last biggest third may be contribution to heart disease, vascular disease. So we know smoking, the commercial tobacco, has a lot of deleterious side effects. And very often it's hard to exactly say someone with lung cancer, did they die from the cancer or did they die from the heart disease and COPD? So it's quite a complicated picture.
In your opinion, like over time with your experience, what is cancer?
Cancer, you can say, is that's not only a biologic question, Nerte, but a philosophical one.
That's exactly what I'm asking.
Yes. We tend to hear things like saying war against cancer, the cancer moonshot. And we use some very militaristic, battering terms. So, of course, these are cells that's within ourselves. They are our own cells that somehow decide to misbehave. and they don't follow the normal rules of growth and growth inhibition. When you come to the border, don't keep growing. Don't grow into, bones if you're a normal lung tissue, and so forth. But in some cases, cancer, you can think of it as an infection, because there are some types of cancers that's brought on, definitely associated with infections, very often viral infections, so-called EBV, viral infections. Some types of herpes infections may cause, not the typical, even genital herpes will increase risk of cancer. The majority, however, are not infectious-related cancers. But so it has to do with dysregulated growth. And why is that? Some of it is due to our molecular mutations. So we normally have growth inhibitions, or so-called tumor suppressor genes. So if these suppressor genes lose their regulation, if the immune system loses our immunity, that tends to lead to disordered growth or allow growth to be hyperproliferative. But in a different way, philosophically speaking, and I'm thinking of a particular author I recently read, an Italian author named Tiziano Terzani. He was an author who lived in most of his life actually in the Far East. But in any case, he was diagnosed with colon cancer when he was already living in India. Quickly rushed back to Italy, Milano, and then to New York, Sloan Kettering, where he was getting all the usual modern treatment of surgery, of radiation, and so forth. But he wasn't feeling so good. So he went to a talk in New York. There's a very famous Buddhist scholar, Robert Thurman, Uma Thurman's father. He's a Buddhist scholar, very well known, dealing with Tibetan scholarship of the Tibetan Buddhism. And in his talk, he said, why do we often think of these cancer cells, that's your own, as being foreign invaders? So the talk is all about, again, very aggressively killing them with chemotherapy, cutting it out with knife and radiating them. What you really need to do is have a conversation and say, cancer cells, what went wrong? What made you turn? And I think in many ways, we know that now one whole line of treatment has directed towards immunology, so-called immunotherapy. So we know that we know so-called psychobioimmunology, when we're not feeling good, when we're depressed, our immunity goes down. So it's not just happy, positive thinking, It's very often addressing the root of our problems, what leads to a lot of imbalance and dysfunction. Does that mean by going through physical therapy, psychotherapy, psychedelic therapy, that we'll get rid of all cancers? Far from it. But I think we'll be better able to, maybe address some of the cancer growth sometimes, but more so adapt also our own responses, instead of just simply reacting and, okay, more chemotherapy, more radiation.
Interesting. When you say about what went wrong, are we talking about various reasons? Could it be mental or could it be physical?
It's quite complex, isn't it? So the mental part, again, different components. We know that not so much what we think typically of mental illnesses, of psychological dysfunction, but of course it may interfere with our care in terms of maybe being more careless with smoking and delay in diagnosis, delay in care. So that aspect of it, our mental well-being, is both affected by and will affect the diagnosis and treatment. Does it affect the cause, which is a little less well known right now?
Yeah.
But the feeling is it probably does play a role. And we know that people who have advanced cancer, and that's been done in a couple of locations, studies very well done, including right here in the Bay Area. There was or is a community called Commonweal, and they took patients with advanced breast cancer. This is in the 80s and 90s. I cannot remember the exact date. And those who have advanced breast cancer that's, quote, incurable, nevertheless tend to live much longer if they have good social support, and if they have good personal well-being. So I think our psychologic input has a great effect on how we respond and quality of life.
Very interesting. That I kind of came to that kind of a sort of a conclusion when I was thinking about what happened. Basically, I know my father-in-law before he got cancer for like for a while now, right? And he was always this super energetic, super like almost young type of a personality, right?
Yes.
He was always, and my expectation was like as you get older, right? And he wanted to be like always active. He wanted to always contribute, he never wanted to feel like he's getting older, and he needs to transition more towards like sharing wisdom rather than trying to like be active supporting the family. Although his kids already grown up, they're already able to support themselves, and plus they are able to support him as well.
Yes.
But for some reason I feel like it felt for him like almost, I don't know, very hard to accept. And when the lung cancer came, his energy just almost depleted immediately.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, so now what? Like it's almost like you identify yourself a certain way, and now it almost like nature or God takes it away from you.
Yes.
Now who are you without that?
It altered his identity, even though he has the most important aspect, which is community.
Yeah.
He did not lose that. But it sounds like he struggled with his purpose. What is his role? Before that, he was the provider. He was the leader.
Yes.
And he probably did not need to ask for help.
Yes.
And the ability to recognize there is a time of so-called self-compassion, right? He was the one who worked for others, who was compassionate for others. He made himself, sacrifice himself a little maybe, always wanting to do everything. I'm extrapolating just from our conversation. But there's a time when suddenly your role is changing. And the most important aspect of being able to live a full life, I believe, is not only how much you have, but of course having compassion and being part of community, being able to share in joy, being able to recognize other people's suffering also. But it all starts with self-compassion. So I wonder if he has been able to accept this event, and also then to be able to say, ask for help. Because of course, cancer, and I presume he has gotten treatment, it can knock the stuffings out of you and lead to fatigue. And I would psychologically think, I myself, if I have a cancer, I would be appropriately reactively depressed, what we call reactive depression. So what is his current status?
He's currently in the hospital. They recently did a surgery on his hip. It was very recent. Like when we were building the studio, it happened.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah, a couple days ago. And that, like when you said about that approach about cancer, that what is happening to me? What is wrong? Where did I go wrong? That very resonated with me, because I also felt something like that towards that whole situation. Like, could it be that some higher consciousness trying to tell you something, like maybe it's time to transition and share the knowledge and be elder, how do you say?
Yes.
We call it aksakal. You know, in our countries, aksakal means like elderly, which means white beard.
White beard. Okay.
Yeah.
Symbolically.
Yeah. So I feel like it's an organic development of the a man.
Yes.
In the household, especially when you get older, you become aksakal, right? But what's interesting is, like, I don't know, ego or fears, like could affect and could maybe not let go, you know, or you start becoming so attached to them that you identify as this is what you are. And that is, I don't know, that was just one of my tears. I'm in no way, how do you say, like 100% know what exactly is happening. It's
Yes.
just like the way I felt. And when you brought up that thing, where did we go wrong? That really resonated with me.
It's not necessarily looking for blame or fault, including self-inspection and say, it's because I insulted someone, or even smokers with a clear-cut potential linkage of cause of cancer or heart disease or whatnot else. Very often we are a society that likes to assign not just rankings, but of course responsibilities and blame. And so once again, I think now, without the ability to interview him, and
Yeah,
you know him
absolutely.
well, but I think where he is in his spiritual path is very important.
Very important. Yeah.
We just had a very interesting discussion today online. I have many different communities, and one of them is something called a Modern Elder Academy, started by actually he's not a guru in the traditional sense, but he is a real good teacher and leader in the midlife transition movement, based out of San Francisco originally, a guy named Chip Conley. But in any case, the whole idea of health right now, of longevity, very often it's focused on the physical aspect. It's all about biohacking. What's your CRP level? What's your V.O2 max oxygen consumption level? And so on and so forth. And we're forgetting this three-ringed Venn diagram with lots of overlap. Also includes very much psychological, depression, which affects behavior and so forth. And then the third part of it is the spiritual health, and the spiritual being, the ability to be equanimitas when things are not going well, not to panic and be very reactive, but to think back, be responsive. And in fact, the relationship with illness, whether it be cardiac, neurological, cancer, and so forth, it's again within us. Not that we cannot change. It does not mean accepting it, and rolling over and say, this is it, this is the end. But how we respond is so important. Yeah. So I think knowing a little more, exploring his spiritual health or his spiritual beliefs, and how that may serve and how it may help serve him overall.
Yeah.
In times, these are difficult times. I'm very sorry for you and your family.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yesterday during the event,
Yes.
one of the most unexpected questions I heard was from you that you caught my attention right away, is about entheogenic plants. And
Yes.
what was exactly the question? Why do investors not invest in those endeavors, right?
So, Nerte, I think you have to explain the context.
Yes,
We're
please.
in Silicon Valley,
Yes.
we're in Tech Valley, and so this was a VC, and it's sort of last minute. I just on a whim joined.
Oh, you didn't even plan to ask that.
Not necessarily,
Okay.
and certainly not because, my questions, I'm a very curious child. Always be curious and continue to learn. And so it's interesting, a couple of things. Most of it was more generic and not related necessarily to health. Of course, my core competency, my deep domain knowledge is, in a sense, healthcare, since I gave you a bit of rundown. But my interest is much more beyond just health technology, and certainly much more beyond just the investment issue. I think when the investment is also always about the ROI, what's your return on investment, what time frame, and so forth. So there was one of the expert panelists who had said, you remember someone asked him, is there anything you wouldn't invest in? These are all private VC guys, angel guys. And he thought for a moment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he said, I would not invest in marijuana. And I agree, because it not only can potentially do harm as well, But anyway, so, and then there was two other people who are vaguely related speaking about health issues. One was the lady who said that, well, actually in 2026, we think there'll be a return of interest in diagnostic testing. And that's interesting because I've been in that technology field for a while, and it's been very difficult to find interest. And the third guy used the term, say, Well, before I line up investment, there's an acid test. You remember? Yeah. Now, acid test, again, may be referring back to the 1960s, again, during the psychedelic era, Ken Kesey, and he had a acid test.
Wow.
He wrote a book.
Is there such a thing as an acid test during, like, nowadays?
No.
It's
So
just
here's
a
really
metaphorical
cultural,
thing.
metaphorical
Okay.
acid test. Okay.
That's so cool.
So I thought, because I've been interested in entheogens for a while, more in the therapeutic sense, because I've been dealing with more and more, again, these diseases of despair or dis-ease of despair. They're not necessarily medical diseases. Simply you can line up with a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5 and say schizophrenia, depression. Very often depression is part and parcel, a manifestation of other disease of despair, including, like I said, I'm expanding it beyond drugs and alcohol to, say, diabetes, lifestyle, severe depression treatment, refractory depression, and these days, in the younger generation coming up now, severe high incidence of anxiety. These are all terrible things, and then they overlap. So what I've learned and found out from entheogens, it's not a panacea, but for some people it is so illuminating and also has been very acutely therapeutic in terms of treating some suicidal severe depressions. And so it's a whole range, but I think gaining insight. But the key thing is, of course, people have been doing it recreationally for a long time and giving compounds a bad name, either endogenous plant medicines that's grown from the ground or synthetic medicines like MDMA, but call it ecstasy and make it commercializable and partied. So I think with the right intentions, there are people who greatly benefit, very much so, whether it be military, where right now in veterans, the number one cause of death, very often in a younger age after they return from service, is suicide. And this also happens in other first responders, policemen, firefighters, high levels. So there's got to be other options of treatment. And entheogens, under the right circumstance, can be life transformational. Yeah. So I asked in terms of, is there for them, have they looked at it as an investment VC opportunity? But I think most of them are stuck on thinking, well, financially we won't have such a good ROI. And also there's always a bit of the legality issue, which I acknowledge. So currently in America, there are 3 going on 4 states: Oregon, Colorado, New Mexico is new to the entry and very limited, where they decriminalize the use of certain entheogens. Ketamine has been quite widespread because it is an approved FDA drug. It's what we call a dissociative anesthetic agent. Now, in high enough dose, you're out. You need to be on a ventilator. And unfortunately, of course, you can overdose. I mean, a la Matthew Perry, for instance. And you can become dependent. People fall into KO. So it's no panacea, and one has to recognize the danger, especially when used not intentionally for healing, but recreationally and become dependency. Other medications, more plant-based and technically more ceremonial, such as different mushrooms, psilocybin, peyote buttons, mescaline, San Pedro, and so forth in North America, ayahuasca in Central and South America, ibogaine from West Africa, and even the people in the Khoisan in South Africa region have kana and a number of different new compounds. And the history of natural entheogens go way back many thousands of years. In old paintings, old sculpture from even India. But of course things have changed quite a bit, sort of a cycling. And I think there is a lot of discussion and debate. And as always, the big question is, and it's apropos back to our original question being asked at the investment conference, most people are poo-pooing or not understanding and saying, oh, microdosing. Microdosing may maintain the neuroplasticity and improve on creativity and so forth. I do believe so. in the right circumstances. But again, with each person, it's a little different, and setting, the intention is very important. But otherwise, it's not necessarily a money-making concept. But unfortunately, currently, I think in North America, we have a couple of different pathways. There is the Native Americans, many of whom basically say, this is our magic, this is our secret, this is our culture, stay out, you have no business. Because look, every time you've touched our culture, you've destroyed it. You've been extractive, our people have been put into a position of servitude, or worse, our culture destroyed, being sent to residential schools, where we are culturally abused, scared, mocked. If you speak in language that's native, they would punish you physically. There was a lot of sexual abuse of minors. So terrible. So we don't want to have anything when it comes to this to do with you. It's our own sanctuary. A second way is, how can we medicalize it? And now there are some very good researchers. Both when I was at Hopkins, I did not know the group, but Dr. Lawrence Griffith, he did a lot of seminal work back on the psychedelics. But he has passed away now. There are many other people following in his footsteps and in other good institutions. But people are also looking at commercializing it and do treatment in a pill, with or without the right so-called vessel or ceremonial aspect. And then is there a third way, which actually really respects the ceremonial aspect? Which brings back, at the end of the day, where we are. You talked about, what's the name for the white beard? Asahal. In Kazakh. A sign of maturity. When you assume the position of being an elder and a sage. And that's not something simply because of age. So maybe one solution is to recognize the primal and very ceremonial aspect of where these plant medicines should be regarded as gifts from Earth Mother, and very often it's Earth Mother, Pachamama or Gaia, and it's not from a white-haired guy who's the father, right? And so how do we incorporate this is a big challenge. But I do believe that this is an ongoing, it takes discussion and open debate and open discussion, but to take away the ego-centric approach and approach it much more eco-centrically. It's, we are part of nature, and we are part of many different societies and cultures, and how to incorporate and to maintain the right balance and respect. That is a challenge and takes intention.
Were you a participant of such ceremonies?
Yes, I can say that I have been an observer, certainly, and a supporter. Yeah.
But you never taken any of these entheogens yourself?
No, actually I have.
Oh, okay.
In Colorado, one of the states where it's legal or not illegal, I actually attended courses run by some very good groups. One is called Prati. It's Psychiatric Research and Training Institute, based outside Denver in Loveland. Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Would you care to describe your experiences?
So this is very interesting, Nerte. I myself have never had what's called a noetic, N-O-E-T-I-C, or mystical experience, even though they gave me fairly high dose. And it could be metabolism, it could be resistant, it could be, hopefully, maybe I didn't have deep-seated trauma that I needed to unravel. But, we all strive spiritual growth, right? However, even though I myself did not have these mystical, life-changing, seeing God, being one of the earth and everything experience, I could see in the case of a couple of occasions now, when there are other participants around, and some with very deep trauma, wounds in their own past lives, and we sit as dyads opposite them, and groups, we were in a group of 40, so there are 20 pairs, and you can really sense the deep opening It's a very, very, very deep and authentic feelings that's expressed. Both of sometimes you have to go through valley of despair before coming out, and of deep joy, of deep connection. So again, more than once I've observed this. And so I'm a firm believer of the possibilities. And this is part of the practice of so-called mudita, which is Hindu and Buddhist approach, which is to say that even though I have not experienced quite the same experience, I can feel and I should celebrate with sympathetic or community joy. Again, it all comes back to community. And as teachers who, in this field and others, some are MDs, some are not MDs, but very trained shamans or practitioners, facilitators. It is all about being there to support others. And the driving force at the end of the day, whether you call it, God or the Holy Spirit, it all comes from the basic human instinct of love. So I do believe that there's something very universal. It's maybe part of what we call the hero's journey. You know the writer Joseph Campbell, scholar Joseph Campbell. He wrote about the common mythologies of different cultures. Of course, the Vikings in the far north, in a frozen tundra situation, would have quite a different mythological characters, the specific characters, than someone in Aboriginal Australia walking song lines, or sea peoples, the Maori next door, or Africans. However, some of the same archetypal characters and the whole pursuit of the so-called hero's journey exists across cultures. And that may be the more defining point of where we start off. Whether are we Homo sapiens, habilis, partly Neanderthals, we all come from the same source. So we should remember that.
I very much so resonate with that, even though I never read the books.
Yes.
But I have a feeling that, people's beliefs, like spiritual beliefs, very much so defined by like their geography, when it comes to detail. But overall, like you said, the archetypes are pretty much the same.
Well, another time, there's a whole different topic of mapping. Is it what we call territorial mapping, which is different from mind mapping, which is a methodology to sort of plan. So there's something called territorial mapping that's been promulgated and proposed and promoted by a couple of people who are in the sort of coaching and life-changing field, and using very typical archetypes that's across different cultures in helping to access the deeper purpose in life of how to regain people's relevance. I think there are lots of searches out there. More and more people of younger age also. Well, always there's been younger people saying, what's the meaning of life? But now this is being accelerated, I believe, while longevity is a given in terms of just looking at epidemiology or actuarial sort of accounting, insurance tables. It is said that 50% of you millennials, I'm looking at you, Saul, and Nerte, you guys fall into the millennial group, right? Yeah. And 50% of you should live to be 100. However, is longevity a blessing or a curse?
That's the question.
We've been so focused on accruing so-called tangible assets, physical wealth of gold bars, of artwork, of cars, of investment, of houses, the typical trinkets. And we've been neglecting the fact that if you live on average to be 100, and on average most people work to be 60, 65, 70, maybe 75, and if you do physical labor, forget it. Much after 50, the body just says, you've been using and abusing me. I cannot do this anymore. So how many people really have sufficient tangible assets of those things I mentioned to sustain you from age 65 until 100? And so there's a lot of anxiety, and if you get displaced, and more, a whole separate topic again is where AI comes in, right? How would it displace people? So you listen to experts. There are many AI experts in this field now, Tristan Harris and others. The concern is, how do we make sure people, when they're displaced and fired and displaced by AI, whether it's Waymo or otherwise, do you have a universal basic income to live? But for me, that is just servitude. You have to somehow be able to provide people, to motivate them, to teach them to have meaning, to have purpose. And again, starting off with, having the supportive community. But beyond that, you have to be able to maintain and build your identity and change and rejuvenate. So I think that's part of the 100-year life cycle. And there are reading resources I'm happy to share with you.
Wow. Very fascinating. I've noticed, like you mentioned, some of the interest in the indigenous cultures around the
Yes.
world. Have you ever met, I don't know, like some people, like shamans or something like that?
Can I ask a question before we
Yes.
dive into the other topic? So I was reading this book by Viktor Frankl,
Oh,
I
yes.
believe. Yeah, like
Man's search for meaning.
right. So also like Nietzsche, he also discusses in his philosophy like the people will struggle because they
Existentialism.
yeah. Also, I read this like Boris Sidis. He was like polymath. He lived in 20th century, and he was writing about like eels, their like cause and cure. So he was also discussing about like this having the purpose.
Like cause and cure for illness?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Viktor Frankl is, of course, well-known psychologist who was in one of the Nazi camps. And he observed people who, some live for a long time in spite of physically they're weakening, and others who come in strong and buffed and in no time die. And it's man's search for meaning. And at the end of the day, it's not religious, but it's about spirituality and the capacity to love, to find meaning. So I think it is all very important that we are not just reactive beings.
We're proactive?
Well, more responsive.
Responsive.
Yeah, of course, proactive is preparing and learning. It's and teaching. There's, I think, no one right way to believe.
Yeah.
I believe, So that's the spiritual part of development.
What is the difference between reactive and responsive?
The reactive is you say something to me, or could be, or even something personal, my investment, what happens to the stock market. We tend to be suddenly very reactive, immediately wanting to respond, immediately want to do some action. Maybe not, and part of the reaction cycle is then not thinking and not listening. When we're talking, am I thinking, what is Nerte going to ask me? What is he going to say? This is how I'm going to respond, what I'm going to say back to you. So that's more of a reactive life. Instead of listening, thinking about it. And sometimes I'll tell you, if you question me, I don't know the answer. I haven't thought about that enough. Let me think about it some more, and we'll have this conversation again. Yeah.
Oh, I see. That's responsive.
More responsive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I think responsiveness, it's helpful if you can be more authentic. But it also means you have to be much more vulnerable.
How to be more authentic? That's probably
Yes.
one of the hardest questions, right?
So
to be more authentic and also have like boundaries, right?
yes, protected boundaries. So when you have the entheogens, that's a very good question, a very good point, because you can be taken advantage of. And we know that happens. To create a safe boundary, part of it is community, part of it is the self, to develop that. But the authenticity, I think, comes from a recognition, knowing oneself and getting good mentoring and friendship and guidance. All those are ways of helping to make it easier to be more authentic. Yeah. To acknowledge one's failings, disappointments. It's okay because we're humans. And I think that's why I think sometimes current generation, and I don't mean young people, I mean us who use social media, have much greater anxiety because of things like FOMO. You know, people don't often show when there's disappointment. Or look at my, although surprisingly, sometimes they say, I failed my exam and show the F grade, right? But more of the time it's people looking very good at parties, they're dancing in Ibiza, they just went on a big wine cruising trip.
Yeah.
And other people feel like, oh, I'm not there. What's wrong? Fear of missing out. So what's interesting is I think there's a place of careful consideration of actually of not fear of missing out, but intention of missing out intentionally, and resisting the temptation of our addiction of the so-called dopamine nation. Right here in Palo Alto at Stanford, there's a Stanford psychiatry professor, and her whole thesis is that this, and she wrote a book called The Dopamine Nation, that our constant checking of social media, of the phone and so forth, is because it gives us a little clicks of dopamine. We become addicted like cocaine rats. You know, they'll tap on the handle, and even though they may starve, they'll still tap on the handle just to get a little bit of cocaine. So unfortunately, and we're so managed by Facebook and everything to respond very reactively. TikTok, you know, I'm not saying that these platforms are completely dangerous, but learning how to use them wisely as wise consumers.
Yeah. One of the interesting side effects with these social media, I should say, is the nomadic culture. So nomadic culture by design doesn't leave any trace. We're like very self-sustainable, but we
Yes.
try not to leave the trace. Therefore, it feels like we don't have a history. But and also the written knowledge, it was not also super established in nomadic cultures, because when you're a nomad, you're moving. You're not carrying a bunch of books with you, right?
Right.
But the knowledge was transferred mostly mouth to mouth.
Yes.
And with these short form contents, now everybody could become a content maker. And I'm learning so much about nomadic culture from people that are coming from that nomadic area, right? And these bits and pieces of information coming from all kinds of different sources kind of paints you a very interesting picture that of the culture that has been forgotten or never been exposed in the world recently.
Yes.
Very fascinating.
And of course, you bring up some, and you asked this before, so maybe we'll transition to talking about indigenous, because nomadic culture is one aspect of indigenous cultures with their own wisdom. Today, when people talk about nomad, they think of the digital nomad. I can be working out of Bali or Phuket or Praha or wherever with my computer. But I'm still tied to the internet, to the ether waves. What you're talking about is, of course, there is a sense of nomadic wisdom. So I've been fortunate enough to travel to, this is Kenya, the Masai colors, with Anthony Willoughby. One of these, he's a real explorer. He has some TED Talks. It's quite fun to watch. And he takes us, so when I went, it's not for the typical safari. We saw animals almost as a byproduct. We were not chasing the big five, big six. Must take a picture of a lion, must take a picture of the rhino and so forth. But learning from, and they are a nomadic culture of moving their herds, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you're absolutely right. I don't believe in the Nilotic people without a traditional written language. Or going to close to you, Kazakhstan, going to Mongolia with the Mongols, herdsmen, and they're very nomadic. But you're so right. Their knowledge gets passed on in an oral tradition. There are shamans, right? And sometimes in the modern society, not so well acknowledged. And I think the important part about the nomadic knowledge of wisdom, how it's passed on, it also have a lot of responsibilities and a lot of rituals, which are good because it's sort of how to mark growing up. Not that there's no problems. So I learned in Kenya, but specifically with the Masai tribes, a 3-year-old boy is given a goat or a sheep because their cattle is wealth. That's a mark of wealth. The more cattle you have, okay, whether you believe in polygamy, but the man will have more wives, more children, and so on and so forth. Not more land, because the land belongs to everyone.
Everybody.
No one owns that, at least in the traditional aspect. So some things becomes taboo. Growing crops is a taboo. Cultivation, because it takes up pasture. But anyway, the 3-year-old boy is given a goat or a sheep. That's the everyday currency to take care of. And they say, Nerte, this is your sheep. Saul, this is your goat. You take care of them. Maybe they'll give milk, they'll marry, they'll have more kids. Our tribe will prosper. But if you let yours fall off the cliff, yours eaten by the hyena, get lost, stolen by the next tribe, we will all suffer. And so as a result, the children learns responsibility very much early on. But of course, they're very supported by the community because the older people aren't going to let the hyena come and eat the goat and Nerte and just stand by and watch. Too bad, you guys lose. And then later on, they get to herd cattle. And then at age 14 or 15, there's a ceremony when they get circumcision without anesthesia at age 15. And then they get sent out into the bushes for the next year until the next rain to basically survive. And who gets chosen to be the leader of this cohort? The brave one, the strong one. Used to be the one who kills a lion. Luckily, no more killing of lions. But they still elect their own leader, who then rise through the ranks of the 20s, 30s, 40s, and they become the future elders. And so I find that fascinating, these rituals. And we've largely, in our Western society, I think, have lost that ritual. So I, looking back, regret not doing national service in Singapore, when rich and poor, when Chinese and Indians and Malays and everyone will come together. And you at least get a recognition and acknowledgement and some experience of how the other lives and have bonds of camaraderie and build a community. Today, the responsibilities tend to be shared early on. So responsibility is very different from, we have to make sure that our children have a lot of self-confidence. So everyone gets a prize, everyone gets praise, no matter I do believe the need for responsibility. And so it's a fine balance, not always blaming them. Recognizing diversity and so on is very important.
Yeah.
But how do we recreate the nomadic or original wisdom?
I mean, with the current, I feel like the time is kind of like has this cyclic way of like, how do you say, manifesting itself, you know? So I feel like the time of nomadic lifestyle or nomadic wisdom or knowledge, I think it's coming back. So right now we have these, sustainability issues, right? Or like some like ecological issues. And I feel like the knowledge from the nomads could be very beneficial in solving current day problems. maybe the approach should be changed. Maybe we should, dial back on some of these consumptions that kind of ruining everything. Plus, I feel like there is, I guess, two types of people, right? Two types of societies: farmers and nomads. So farmers used to farm in one place, and then that's how they develop their farms. They become rich. They expand their farms. They start trading, and when you farm in one place, you basically emptying those resources, right? Those resources do not replenish. Yeah. But when you're a nomad, you use a land for a season, then you move to a different land. And then while you're moving, your cattle leaves manure, therefore fertilizing along the way. Plus, you don't come back to the same place the next year. You let that land to replenish over 2 or 3 years, then you come back to it. So therefore, this is the most optimal and most you get the most benefit from the land, from the ground, from the earth that mother earth gives you.
Right.
Meanwhile, you're here pretty much using up all the resources of the ground, and you try and meanwhile to solve these problems with some artificial fertilizers, and then plus like pesticides. It becomes like more complex and complex. You're creating problems, and then with the wealth that you accumulated, you're trying to just fix those. But that's not necessarily the approach at the end of the day. It's not sustainable.
Right.
You're sucking the resources from the earth, like oil and everything, which is finite.
It sounds like a cancer.
Yeah. So what you're bringing out are very good points, although I think it's more nuanced and complex than that.
Yeah.
So certainly there is very much interest, I myself, in the so-called nomadic wisdom, if you will, of like camels going across the desert and leaving a shadow, but not any bad tracks. However, even in agricultural societies, and of course those have also existed not as long as nomadic hunter-gatherers, but many, many tens of thousands of years in retrospect, it does not necessarily have to be destructive. Of course, if you're not careful, and one of my university medical school professor, his name is Jared Diamond, and people know him for having written books like Guns, Germs, and Steel, and then subsequently Collapse, and most recently Upheaval. So he was my physiology professor in medical school. And his claim to fame is, back then he won a Pulitzer Prize for Guns, Germs, and Steel, which is his documentation and interpretation of human culture. So certainly moving from the hunter-gatherer to the more sedentary, growing type of a lifestyle, nevertheless, that allowed culture to develop.
Absolutely.
Because when you have extra calories that you can cultivate, and so it depends. North Americans, the Indians, they planted corn, so it's not that it's completely without...
What I'm saying is like probably the situation went out of control.
Yes.
Yeah. But back in the day, nomads and farmers used to coexist.
Right. And farmers learned how to crop rotate and leave fields fallow. So you would rotate and grow maybe legumes with its intrinsic nitrogen.
Yeah.
But you're right about the extractive part. So whether it's the nomadic, whether it's the non-nomadic, but tribes in the Amazons, they're not particularly nomadic. They're in a way much less nomadic destructive than people are bringing the cattle in and then slash and burn the field, and then the nutrients are gone. But the biggest thing is, I think, the notion that we own and can control the land, whether as nomads, whether as sedentary farmers. This idea of being extracting and exploiting instead of regenerating. So the Native Americans, they know how to manage, for instance, the knowledge, the traditional ecological knowledge, TEK, of not having these severely destructive wildfires, so-called wild, because they know they need cycles of burning and controlling the underbrush and so forth. So now we're going back and learning whether it's a Shoshone or right here in California, down by Big Sur, Esalen, the Esalen Institute. Esalen is the name of the local people. And they knew how also to do controlled burnings, right? So the idea that you're much more respectful and living in balance with the land, again, being eco-centric instead of ego-centric. Whereas, unfortunately, even when you talk about, extracting minerals and so on, well, we need some of the minerals and oil, but really, do we need so much of it? And do we need to destroy it? And do we need to own so much? So I think this idea of an imbalance, and the native, when they're hunting, they only kill as much as they need, and they thank the nature, the gifting of the food from the animals and so forth. So I think this mindfulness aspect of how we consume, unfortunately, very much not from our day-to-day. So starting with a return of those acknowledgement and appreciation in small ways every day, daily ways.
I would like to share one of my entheogenic experiences.
Oh yes, please.
And it was one of the most profound ones. They say, like, when you kind of go to those, use those substances, you must come with some sort of a question, right? And my question was, what is my mission in life? And in one of the intense moments of that experience, I was looking at the fire. We were outside in the Big Tree State Park. Have you been there? It's
No,
the
no.
most craziest place I've ever been. It's like the oldest trees. Like you get to meet like the oldest beings
The
that
tall
are alive.
redwoods, yes,
Yeah. And that was the most intense experience. When you realize that they're alive and they're looking at you, it's a very frightening experience, to be honest. They're looking at you like you're a little kid, like you're a little child. That's how I felt, at least. So I'm looking at the fire, and I saw one of the guys threw like a plastic bottle or something, and I saw like that black smoke coming in, and that lit a really very, very profound effect. So the fire was burning, the aura was really nice and organic, but that black smoke that was just coming out, and I like turned around and I see a lot of like litter just laying down, and that kind of gave me this message that I'm like, okay, like I felt something.
Yeah.
Something about that, like this is even though you see it's burning, but like the vibe changes there. It's not organic. It's not supposed to be like that.
Yes.
That's kind of a feeling that I felt. So I wanted to share that.
Thank you. Yeah. There's a philosopher, writer, therapist from Durango in Colorado. He has something called the Animus Institute because of the river there, but also because of animus, the male-female halves of us, the different characteristics. And anyway, what he does is bring people, instead of a silent retreat in a vipassana of meditation in a ashram, his ashram is nature. So 3-4 days, mini, or the full-on one is 10-11 days in nature when you're alone. And of course, they keep you safe. You have food until the last 3 or 4 nights, days. It's a nature fast. And you can end up with a entheogenic experience without any medicine, without any plant medicines.
I've had that.
You've had that also?
I did 15 days on water only.
Wow, yeah.
On day 12, I felt something very close to the spiritual experience.
Yes, but of course you have to be carefully supervised. Yes.
Yes.
Well,
I tried to do it again, but I listened to my body at that time, and my body said
no.
nope.
Yeah.
But the very first time, I was able to do 15 days.
Yeah. And then, of course, holotrophic breathing of stainless grafts. That's also different ways of
But
breath
that was
works.
one of the most purest experience, because in entheogenic, you're still taking some substances that
right.
kind of affect you.
Yes.
And it's not all how do you say? It's not all coming from within you. Something from the outside brings it out from you. But here, you actually reducing, like your how do you say?
shedding.
You're shedding. Yes.
Yeah.
That was very cool.
Yeah.
Pure. It was a pure
Yes,
experience.
yes. So what Bill Plotkin talks about in soulcraft, nature is the source of soul, of our soulness, because instead of thinking that we're a body with a soul, we should be thinking of we're souls with bodies and transient. So depending on your journey, personal journey of faith and beliefs, then when you pass on, you're just in, being in transmission into the next state.
In Kazakh language, the saying for passed away was a kaytte, which means went back.
Went back.
Like came back. He
Yeah.
went back somewhere. So like he came from there
Yes.
and he went back.
And I don't know in Kazakh, but in Mongolian, the whole structure of, it's not just earth either, it's also the big blue sky, right? So it's the dimensionality of space and time. It's much
Yeah.
more complex.
Like a tree of life, you have the roots,
Yes.
you have the stem, and you have the eternal
Yes.
blue sky. Right?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Like the tree of life.
Yes. So
Yeah.
back to, these endogenous wisdom and mapping, because if you tell, and this is where Anthony Willoughby, when he went to Papua New Guinea, the same place where Jared Diamond in Writing Guns, Germs, and Steel got a lot of his original inspiration from working and observing the Papua New Guineans with their culture. Anthony realized that, the ability to recall by physically drawing map, it could be scratching on the sand, but the physical act of thinking about these structures, you mentioned the iconography of the sky and the tree and the roots. Exactly. So we start thinking in terms of our purpose in life, maybe is to go back and look and say, well, before we can get to the purpose, first let's look at, are there impediments? Are there things that's helping us and limiting us? Are there limiting beliefs? Are these limiting beliefs henceforth what you can write down as we call swamps? What gets us stuck? Are there the rivers that also prevents us from crossing to the other side? But these iconography are a little more interesting because a river can represent also a flow of life, can be representation of age, can be representation of energy. But in the river runs also danger, rapids and rocks. Mountains, are they barriers we have to supplant? Or are they places that can give us a better view and protection?
Yes.
And so forth. What is it that in the territory, what is this territory? Is it home? Is it family? Is it job? Is it country? Is it looking for a purpose? That's the territory I want to own. And in the process, you have to say, what am I hunting? What am I hunting with? So all these metaphoric elements, and we think that some of that is very primal. So like you said, even if you don't use language, if you don't have a written language, it's an oral language or a visual language. And some of those goes back to now neuroscientists doing all the studies. And they're intrinsically locational cells in our body, in our brains. In fact, a Norwegian scientist and his wife and a British collaborator, their mentor, won the Nobel Prize, I think in 2012 or 16, in working out the GPS systems in our brain, the cells responsible, place cells, grid cells. And interestingly, one of the locations they're close to is the hippocampus, where we form memories. And one of the place where the entheogens effect would include the hippocampus, very much so. Our ability to form new memories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
New pathways.
New pathways, opening up. So this is a opening new world area.
Yeah,
a lot of new things are
definitely.
being studied in a multidisciplinary way. And what I like about this is Bay vibes. So the Bay Area tends to be much more a welcoming, thus far, welcoming avenue of people, with new ideas, so-called design thinking. I'm sure you've talked about design thinking in this show. Are you a
Absolutely. Yep.
design thinker?
He's
Yeah, I'm designer, so I'm familiar with design thinking. I think it was developed in Stanford
yeah.
University by Prof. Kelly.
I think so. I'm not sure of his name now. Yeah. But the concept, however, is, people tend to think of, we invite different groups of people to come in together with different backgrounds, prototype ideas quickly. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fail. You just keep on reiterating and improving and coming out with a product. But what we've been talking about is really respecting different cultures, respecting history. Absolutely. And I think the key aspect of design thinking, other than the standard methodology of rapid prototyping and fail quickly kind of thing, is actually the emphasis on empathy. That's a driving principle. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. When it comes to my mission of trying to bring back some of that knowledge from my ancestry, I'm also learning about it too, because I grew up in a communistic country, and so we can relate to that together. And a lot of the history and stuff was pretty much gone. Yeah, and now I'm kind of learning a lot more about my culture. That kind of just blows my mind. Oh wow, that's the knowledge. That's like completely different understanding, completely different approach to life and everything else. And Silicon Valley or Bay Area in particular was very welcoming place, and in terms of people, how they're open to different ideas, like you mentioned. And I never felt how do you say it? So in resonance with people around here. I'm just fascinated by just diversity, like diversity in nature here.
Yes.
Same way. Diversity in nature, you can see so many different trees, so many different plants. I've never seen a lot of those plants in my life, and you're like, wow, this is diversity. And the land produces diversity, therefore diverse people are attracted to this land too. Very, very magical place.
Now, the downside is, on the other hand, given the great success of all the startups, everyone wants to be the next Google,
the next Steve Jobs,
the next Steve Jobs, and to be employee number 15 or 13 or 10. So there's still the metrics of reward for most people is what type of bus you can ride in, meaning are you with the unmarked bus for Google or for Apple, for the FANGs,
Yeah.
And what's your take home and what's your net value. So there's this dialectic tension that's constant. But hopefully people don't forget. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel I can totally get it, but I think whenever there is a success, people get attracted to success, and you're bound to have something like this
and
eventually.
Envious of success.
Yeah.
So once again, ego is the driving force very often. And as we say of ego is a great helper, but a bad boss.
Yeah. Great helper, bad boss. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
You got to be boss of your own ego.
Yes,
right?
that's right.
Yep, cool. That's a good saying. It's been an hour.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your time. It was really a pleasure. I enjoyed every
pleasure.
second of it.
Yes.
And to finish it, like you requested.
Yes.
The jaw harp.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So you have headphones on, and you get to experience it firsthand.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good
The next
energy.
part of the experience is the yurt.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Cool.
So that went okay.